Our next presenter is Ashley Herbert, the owner of the consulting firm Agrarian Management, where his focus is on supporting his clients to optimise after-tax business product by developing a production system and business cost structure that can achieve reliable products over time. He's going to be focusing on current alternatives for managers to operate a livestock enterprise. So this will be looking at the ownership, the lease and the share farm that we know. Also looking at the whys and the opportunities that we may not be capturing. So, Ashley, please come on up.
Thanks, Georgia. Good morning, everybody. 2021 is a bit of a special year for me because I've sort of realised I've had constant reminders that I'm progressing in life. I've played hockey since I was 10 years old, and there's 40-odd year career there. And in the last 18 months, I've had more serious injuries in the last 18 months in hockey than I had in the whole 40 years of my career of hockey. I'm almost on first-name terms with the doctor in the emergency department at Charlie Gardner. Our oldest child turned 21 the other day, and we've got 4 kids. One has left home, one came back. One's left home, we've got 3. And we've had our first 21st with 2 more to come in the next 2 years. And more pertaining to 2021 is I find myself saying to clients with regards to the rainfall, this is how it used to be. It always used to be like this. And I remember when I started consulting, all the old blokes were saying to me the same thing. You young blokes just don't understand. This is how it always used to be. I thought that might have been a bit funnier than it was. Oh, sorry. And I was just reflecting what Zach said about his listening more. And I guess I've been married for 27 years, and I think I get a constant reminder every day for 27 years to just to listen a little bit more, please. So it's a bloke thing, I'd say. Okay. This is my title. What I want to start with is just reminding everybody that livestock is a commodity game, all right? We all think our wool's very special, but it's not really, it's just wool. And the people that buy it, they are there to buy it for a price, and they want to pay the least they can get away with. The sheep that we sell to the processors, it's just red meat to them. It's very special meat to us, but it's a commodity in trade. Meat's meat. Red meat is red meat. Whether it's beef or lamb, chicken or pork, it's a commodity. And the thing to remember about that is that to make money in a commodity business, we need to produce lots for a low cost. That's the business model. And that's quite simple because it just gives us some very simple things to focus on. How can we generate output, and how do we manage our costs? And whatever we do, and as Zach was saying in his presentation, it's about growing something that we can feed our animals to produce something we can sell to somebody to generate some revenue. And how much pasture we grow will drive how much animal material we can produce and sell. It's that simple. Now, you might think commodity markets, it's a bit boring, but it's great because every day of the week you know what your products are worth. The markets are transparent and you can find out. Price discovery is easy. And probably most importantly for farmers, you don't have to talk to anyone. You don't have to know who your end user is. You don't have to need to know how they feel. You just need to know what they're prepared to pay for and how much, and then how can you meet that market. And I think as a business model, that makes life so much easier because farming is hard enough on its own without having to worry too much about who's buying your products. Okay, now, when we get into livestock, to make money from livestock, it's quite simple. There's 5 things that we need. The first 2, land and livestock, are pretty obvious. If you haven't got land or livestock, you don't have much of a business or an enterprise. But the people side of it is key. When we look at any benchmarking work comparing different businesses, the key driver of variation between businesses is management. Some people are exceptionally good at what they do, and some people are exceptionally poor at what they do. But we all have the same markets, we all have the same seasons. What drives differences between businesses mostly is how well people go about the business of running livestock. Not forgetting, of course, we all need access to working capital to buy things, because if you can't buy inputs, it's very difficult to generate output. Now, this is just some details about those elements as to what makes them important, but the overriding theme through all this is about control. If you own everything, you have total control and total discretion over what happens and when. If you're leasing land, someone else owns it, someone else decides what improvements they're going to do, someone else decides what infrastructure is on that block of land. You can go and build your own sheds and yards if you want to, but you're unlikely to if you're on a lease property. So once we're starting to outsource control, what that's doing is that's limiting our options to some degree. And we see that particularly with livestock. Now, leasing livestock is done, but it's quite rare. And it's quite rare because if you own some animals, they're quite a mobile asset class and they're quite fragile. They might be worth a lot of money, but when you lease your livestock to a person, you're entrusting them with the welfare of your animals, which are, in today's money, significant amount of capital. And
I'm a veterinarian and flies get into my youth. No bullshit. This is off my alarm. Alright, I know I smell bad, but it's not me, I promise. I gotta go out there. I gotta go swat some flies. See you later.
thank you. Bloody vets are always causing trouble. Sorry, I did neglect to give you a bit of a run through what I was going to cover. What I thought I'd do this morning is just run through how I see the business of livestock. Then I want to really talk about what I think the main profit drivers are that growers have at their disposal that make a big difference to making money. And then I thought I'll touch on leasing and share farming as options to sort of get access to land and or livestock. And then I've got a few things that people are doing differently to profit share and disperse some of the risk with running some of these livestock operations. So moving along. Okay, livestock these days is a capital intensive industry, or business I should say. Now this is for a pretty modest flock of sheep, 2,000 ewes at Kojonup. You're going to need nearly over $3.5 million to run less than 1,000 acres of sheep in a place like Kojonup. And I suspect on a dollars per DSE investment, it would be the same everywhere. It's just if you go out east, the land's a bit cheaper, but on a DSE basis, I suspect it's not too different to that. So it is a very intensive, it's a capital demanding business, and that's farming all over the world. I don't think there's any secret about that. In terms of where they make the money, the operating return gives you a 4 to 7% cash yield. But the land is where the wealth comes from. In Kojonup, land has appreciated over the last 30 years, on average 6 to 8%, depending on when you started. And that's a considerable amount of capital gain over the long term. Now, if you look at leasing, you can do a substantially better return, but the issue with that is you've only got $600,000 of capital tied up in a lease, earning 10 to 25%, whereas you've got $3.5 million worth of capital tied up in land and livestock, if you own it, generating 10 to 15% return. So 10% of $3.5 million is a fair bit of money. 25% of 600, it's a bit. This is why most farmers continue to buy land, because it's where the wealth is. And if you're in the business of livestock, owning land is one of the end goals that you should be aiming for, because that gives you security of tenure, but it also creates the wealth. I tend to think farmers can do some stupid things for a little while, but they don't do them for very long. So if farmers repeatedly do something over the long term, there's got to be something in it. And farmers repeatedly buy land, pay it off, buy more. And that's because it's a massive generation of wealth for them personally and their business. What's happened here? Right, here we go. Okay, getting to the money side of things. This is where we are at the moment. This is gross margins per DSC from Kojonup. It's the same all over the state, doesn't matter. But the last 5 years have been incredibly profitable for sheep and, I suspect, cattle. And I'm predicting the green is 2021, $65 a DSC. The last 5 years, it's averaged close to 55. So, you know, even compared to the wool boom of the late 80s, things are going really well. So there's every reason why you should get excited about being in livestock, full stop, because there's a lot of money on the table. And this graph really highlights what's happening at the moment. This is margin per DSC, margin per hectare. Oh, I know, I lent on it. Bloody hell. I lent on the...
Oh, you're all good.
Oh, it's on, sorry. Okay, so what's happening here is as the DSE margin goes up, the difference between businesses on a per hectare basis explodes. So what that's saying is there's real reward for effort now. When margins were thin, you could work like Billy-O, but the chance of making a lot more money was quite limited because the margins were so small. These days, the margins are pretty fat. Every DSC that you can run on your property generates $60 to $70 of profit. If you can run another 1,000 DSCs on your property, that's another $60,000 to $70,000 of profit. The money is made in livestock by grazing green pasture. This is the cost per tonne of dry matter growing pasture compared to grain. But at its core, it's about energy down the throat of the animal, because that's how we get growth. It's all about energy. And the thing about pasture is it's extraordinarily cheap energy, extraordinarily cheap. So the more of this we can get down the throats of our animals, the cheaper growth we're going to get. As soon as we feed them grain, it's a massive cost. Energy is extremely expensive feeding grain. So a key driver of livestock systems is to do the bulk of your growing on pasture, because that's where the cheap feed is. It's that simple. Now, as Phil was saying, we can influence that a little bit with nitrogen, but it's a lot cheaper than grain, but it's nothing like the pasture you grow on an annual basis. The growing season is where the feed grows. So a long growing season will grow a lot more feed than a short growing season, irrespective of how much rain you have. Okay, so what I've done here is I've taken the 100-year rainfall records from Kojonup and I've broken them up into annual quartiles. And then I've just averaged the year out, and I've had a bit of a guess at the growing season for each of those quartiles. So you can see for Kojonup, half the time the growing season's 6 months, the other half it's more than 6 months. And 25% of the time you've got 8 months of growing season. So that's the business part of the season. That's where you generate most of your money. And it ranges from 6 to 8 months. What's the big deal about that? Well, if we go out to Nanup, we've got 75% of the time, we've got 8 months of growing season, and 25% of the time, we've got 10 months of growing season. So the capacity to generate revenue from livestock in that environment is huge. Coupled with that, if you just take a sort of view of the variation around that season distribution of rainfall, and then we compare that to MeatUp. At this part of the year here, the start of the season, when it's most tricky, MeatUp's got quite a reliable rainfall pattern. And at the other end of the season, when spring's sort of kicking in, you've got a very reliable rainfall pattern. If we go to Coconut, for example, it's a little bit variable around the start of the season, which affects how we run our sheep and what we do, and the spring's got a little bit more variation. But when we go out east of Merredin, look at this, far out. Half the time, you've got a growing season of 4 months, 16 weeks, 50% of the time. 25% of the time, you've got a growing season of 8 months. I mean, that's fantastic variation. How on earth you manage that is really tricky. Now, traditionally what people do is they run very low stocking rates because they're focused on this. And the other thing they do is they all want to sell their finished lambs here, so they lamb there. So how can we lamb here and in a short growing season half the time? We don't run many sheep, that's how we do it. Because we all want to finish our lambs there. We want to sell lambs for $150 plus because that's where the money is. This is central wheat belt, Cundon and Tamman area, still quite a bit of variation. So why I'm sort of saying all that is if you're serious about livestock and making money from livestock, this variation here complicates things extraordinarily, and it really forces conservative planning and very low productive systems because you just never know how the season's going to pan out. Whereas if we go to the high rainfall area, extremely predictable. Once we have predictable seasons, we can really push things to the limit because we know most of the time it'll be fine. Complexity introduces risk, and risk really hammers people's ability to aggressively attack production targets. Now, with livestock, it's particularly hard because you can't turn them off. You've got these things for 365 days a year and they've got to go somewhere. You can't turn them off and park them in the shed. So what this is for Broom Hill. This is just the months from the end of one season to the start of the next. Okay, so it's incredibly variable. Half the time, nearly half the time it's 6 months. 5% of the time, so 1 year in 20, it's 9 months. That's nearly a whole year between seasons. Once every 20, that's huge. That's a huge amount of time for it not to rain. And occasionally it's quite a short spell. Now, I think from 20 to 21, it's up here and people are wondering what all the fuss is about. But the real trick is you make your money by maximising the number of livestock on green feed through the season, but you can only stock your pastures with what you carry through the summer. And the big limitation is, how do we manage this? Now, Phil covered off on a lot of that, and I think the challenge for everybody is to really maximise the number of animals they can carry into the season, because that's all the money you can make. If you're running 10,000 sheep, 10,000 times the income is what you're going to make. If you can only run 5,000, 5,000 times the income is all the money you can make, minus costs. So being able to lift the numbers as high as possible really gives you the potential to make a lot of money. Now, this is from DPERD, going back to 2016. Each dot is 10,000 sheep, all right? So it just shows you in the state back then where all the sheep were. But the point I make is there's a lot of sheep out here in this low, medium rainfall, highly variable season, right? Now, what people do is they typically lamb early so they can get bigger lambs to sell for a decent price at the end. The cost of doing that is they're massively understocked most of the time, just in case things go pear-shaped. Because when you're lambing early, that's quite a rigid system. Your options for managing seasonal variation are about zero. Well, you've got one, feedlots. And no one wants to do that. So we run very low stocking rates. So there's tremendous underproductivity in this region, particularly with lambs, because we gear our system to make a certain price. Now, from our benchmarking repeatedly, price differences between businesses does not drive profit differences between business. Just because someone's got a high price for their lambs or their cows or their wool has no impact on whether they've made more money than their neighbours. It's volume for a low cost. That's what drives profit. And how many animals you can sell for a low cost of production drives profit, and that's stocking rate. It's that simple. So I think there's opportunity for people here to send lambs and young animals here where the seasons are longer, they're reliable, and it's where the cheap feed is, and we can get big animals growing cheaply, and we can have systems here, and I'm talking July lambing, that enables us to manage our seasonal risk well. And once we do that, we can lift productivity with minimal risk because we've got plenty of options to manage those poor seasons. But until we can sort of get out of this model of trying to finish lambs on our own farm in a short season, we're stuck with this early lambing, which is a real constraint to productivity. Okay, these are the margins. I'm thinking it's going to be $65 a DSE for this year. This is how I'm sort of working it out. So when I say gross margin, they're the costs I'm talking about, just so you know, all right? Now, Alan Pegs, this really pains me to show you this. This really pains me because if we look at this $65 a DSE, this is from Alan Pegs, notable cattle expert, $77 a DSE. In all my years, I've never seen that. There are two things you can be confident about. That, thank you. It always rains in Kojonup, and sheep always make more money than cattle, right? Always. Except this year. Rightio. So the other thing I think it's useful to look at is what's a ewe worth? So if we're going to the market to buy them, what can we afford to pay? So I've had a bit of a go at this several times. So it really depends on how you perceive the future to be, because you're buying a ewe today for the next 3, 4, 5 years, aren't you? So you have to make some judgment. What do I think is going to happen for the next 5 years? Which is a bit tricky. But when you're buying something like a sheep or a cow, that's exactly what you're doing, because what you pay is a summation of how you perceive the future to be. Okay, so I'm saying $200 for a 1.5-year-old ewe that you'll keep for 5 years, right? And over the 5 years, this is cash flow. This has nothing to do with financing. It's just money out, money in, all right? So it's $200 plus a bit of a ram, so it's $218 per ewe. At the end of 5 years, you sell everything, right? You're not selling 100 ewes, you're selling 82, because a few of them don't make it through on a regular basis, which is normal, all right? So that's the cash flow. So you're turning an investment of $218 into a return of $318, I think that says. Is that a reasonable return? Put it another way, $218,000 and you end up with an extra $317,000 in your bank. Is that a reasonable return? Yeah. 19.7% year on year. That's pretty good. Not forgetting though, someone's doing the work and there's a fair bit of risk. I mean, these things could die. They could disappear. Who knows? You know, anything could happen to them. They're quite a mobile asset that's quite fragile in some cases. So there's a lot of risk. So you need a pretty solid return to make it worth it, don't you? So when you think $200 for a young ewe, wowee, that's probably fair value in my book. That's what you need to get. If we're a little bit overly optimistic and things don't turn out quite so well, we still get 16%. So that's 10% less income. That's not bad. You double your money, 15% will double your money in 5 years. That's not too bad. If we go to $250 for the ewe, you're sort of testing it a bit. You're sort of getting down to returns that I think probably don't reward you for the risk. So either you've got to be more optimistic or find something else to do with your money. Rightio, I'll just quickly move on to leasing. Look, leasing, share farming, they're quite common. Leasing's very common, share farming's quite rare, particularly in livestock. In fact, I've talked about it a lot, but I've never seen it happen. Why is that? It's complicated, and the most effective program to make money for a tenant is to control everything. So if they can lease the land, they then have full autonomy over the operation, and that's what it's all about. In a lease, the tenant bears most of the risk. Share farming's all about deciding how much risk we share, commensurate with how much profit we share. So it's a true risk sharing. Today's leasing markets are extremely competitive, and the tenant is taking on more and more and more risk. And I guess once I would have said leasing was a no-brainer to make real money, I'm a bit nervous with what some rents people are paying. And I seriously hope they know what they're doing, because you sort of wonder how much risk they're taking on knowingly. Okay, so going back to our original example, 2,000 ewes, we've got $217,000 of profit to share between the landlord and the tenant. That's all there is. Now, there's some extra costs, a bit of overdraft interest, some rates, some insurance, depreciation, and some infrastructure sort of upgrades and that sort of thing. So I'm saying there's $195,000 of profit to share. Thanks. I would say, in my view, in the ideal world, the landlord would take 40% and the tenant would take 60% as reward for risk. That's what I would say, in the ideal world. Because the landlord does nothing, no risk, and they get a fair bit of money, which is fair enough. So I guess that's what we see, all right? So it's a 2/3, 1/3 share. But more typically, the landlord is taking at least 50% of the profit. Why are they doing that? Because they can. Tenants are bidding up the price because there's desperation almost for land. So what's happening is the landlord's getting more, the tenant's getting less, with all the risk. So what I'd say is, if you're contemplating leases, just be very clear. Just be very clear what you think is on the table, and be very clear as to what you're prepared to give up. And more importantly, is the total amount of profit worth all the worry? You know, $100,000, that's a reasonable amount of money. It's not going to change your life, but it's a reasonable amount of money. If it was $50,000, I don't know, would you bother? So it's not just the dollars per hectare, it's the total profit. Is it worth all the mucking around, given the risk you're taking on? Now, with leasing, this is the important bit, earnings. They're the big driver. The more money you make from a lease, the more you can pay for rent, the more competitive you can be in the market. And what's happening is those who can pay are paying, and they're getting the land. So this is just an example where we've increased stocking rate by just over 10%, so a marginal increase in stocking rate, and it's had a significant effect on how much you can pay for the lease at any profit distribution. So earnings is everything. Average productivity is just not enough to be in the rental game anymore. If you're an average producer, you probably won't get a lease because you won't make enough money. It's that simple. I'll just skip over that, I think. Right, just to finish on these. Now, these are a few examples of some innovations I've seen in how people try and manage risk or take advantage of opportunities. Now, the first one is it's a farmer who's a lamb producer. He typically lambs late, so he ends up with these little lambs at the end of his season. He's in a very short growing season area, and his lambs are unfinished, and I think he struggles to meet the store market. He's got a friend down south who's a beef producer. In the long season, he has surplus pasture. He's got the option to cut hay or graze the pasture. So they have an arrangement where farmer one trucks the lambs down there, farmer two grows them out, delivers them to the processor, and they split the proceeds on a pro rata on a delivered weight basis. So they share the profit. And I think that's marvellous, because This person here, he can focus on producing lots and lots of little lambs, and this person here can focus on turning little lambs into big lambs and getting a fair return for excess pasture that would normally either have to be cut for hay or go to waste. So this person here can lamb late, manage his risk with the full knowledge that having little lambs isn't an impediment. A slight variation on the same theme. This is a wheat belt example. Farmer A is a lamb producer, similar short season. He sends his lambs off to his mate who's got spare lupin stubbles, who has absolutely no interest in running sheep. The only difference is they put a value on them at the start of the proceedings. Then they split the profit 1/3, 2/3. Once again, farmer A is able to have a livestock system that, like lambing late basically, so he can then manage his risks, his seasonal risks, and lift his stocking rate, knowing full well getting rid of sheep's not going to be an issue. So he's able to have a livestock system that's quite simple and gives him plenty of options to manage risk. Volume by low cost, and that works. Now, in preparing for this presentation, I came across this. I gather it's quite common in beef circles, so given I don't circulate in beef circles very often, it was quite a revelation to me, but this is Harvey Beef. They have these feedlot systems and they want continuity of supply of a certain quality. So they have gone out into the market and said, look, we'll buy all these animals, we'll pay for everything, you just run them and put the weight on and we'll pay you cents per kilo or dollars per kilo live weight. Why would a grower do that? Well, at the moment, when these animals are worth nearly $2,000, we're in the 10th decile for pricing, there's more chance the price will come off than go up. You're sitting on a lot of risk capital when you're buying the weaners for $1,800, $2,000, because they could become $1,500 animals if something goes wrong in the market. So in today's game, there's a lot of interest in this because it takes the risk from the grower and they just want to get on and grow beef. And I think it's a marvellous, and it gives the feedlotter, the processor, what they need. Continuity of supply, and they're in a bit of control. So they get what they want. And of course they pay for it. Do they make money? Don't ask me that, you need to go and speak to them. But they seem pretty happy with it. Now look, here you go. You see Wayne Smith's name there. Wayne's always been a little bit different, and the thing I like about Wayne Smith, he just challenges the norm, and I think he's been fantastic for agriculture in Western Australia. He had a brilliant idea to go out, drum up some investors, get some money together, buy a small parcel of land because he wanted to run. He realised there was untapped potential in the rainfall to grow dry matter to run extraordinarily high numbers of sheep. And he's out there doing it. In 3 years, he's running 40 DSC to the hectare down at Narrowcup. So, why am I bringing that up now? Because he made it happen. So there's an appetite out there for people to invest in something that's got prospects of making money. Now, as you can imagine, if you've got an average production outlook, you're not going to get much joy because who wants to invest in that? So these things work if you can hit those really high production targets. And I thought that's a great example of what's possible if you're a little bit creative with your thinking and you've got a little bit of get up and go. I've been down there and it works. Like he's sorted it out, and I think it's just a fantastic innovation for that district because he's really putting the acid on the locals to say, well, you know, if you're only running 12 DSC down there, he's running 40. There's massive opportunity that goes missing every year. Thank you. I'll leave it there if that's all right. Yeah, look, sorry, just to finish. Look, in today's game, it's extremely competitive, whether you're leasing or even trying to buy land. And if you're just an average producer, you're really going to struggle to get ahead because there's people doing it very well that are quite aggressively acquiring land. If you haven't got scale, you need to be very good at what you do and be in the top sort of brackets for profitability, because that's what you've got. Having said that, scale will trump. If you're big enough, it doesn't matter what you do. Scale trumps everything. But if you don't have scale, you need to be way above average to be competitive with people with a bit of scale. So, and I think with livestock, you always got to focus on the profit drivers. What are they? How can I influence them? What's possible? And make sure you do your sums properly, because I see with sheep, I see a lot of back of the envelope sort of sums done, and what I think is happening is people have made up their mind and they just sort of scratch out a rationalisation on a bit of paper just to justify what they want to do really, which is fine, but don't kid yourself, you're making an objective decision. So there's people like myself and Ed and a few others that float around that are very happy to help you do all that sort of stuff, but it's important to be objective and do your sums properly. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Georgia.